Tamamdır,
Görüşmek
sağ olun.
dileğiyle kolaylıklar diliyorum.
Sağ ol.
Teşekkürler.
Tamam. Buyurun.
Hello everyone. Hello everyone. Welcome. This is the first one of our writing workshops. Today we are with Ola. Ola is an active advisory board member of Scholarly Communication Network. She will tell us how to write a proposal for a grant application today. For the second writing workshop, which will be held on the 25th of November, our topic will be writing a scientific article. Many thanks to Ola for her support in organizing both of these workshops. We organize these events in cooperation with the University and Research Librarians Association of Turkey and the Scholarly Communication Network. Let me briefly introduce these two organizations. University and Research Librarians Association is active in Turkey for more than 20 years. Currently, Fatih Kumsal is leading the association. He is also among us. The association's main aim is to contribute to the professional development of librarians working in university and research libraries in Turkey. On the other side, Scholarly Communication Network is relatively very new. We established the network this year with Zehra. Our main aim to support early career researchers and help them increase their awareness and networking skills. And now Zehra will introduce Ola in more detail.
Hi there, welcome to our seminar on tips and tricks of grant writing. We are hosting a great speaker today, and we have a very good subject for early career researchers. We are very happy to have Ola today. She's a great scholar working on writing English as a second language. She is my colleague from Purdue University, Scholarly Communication Research Group. And my co-author also. She is conducting a research project on scientific writing of Polish early career researchers. She lives in the United States, and so it is very early morning for her, and we are very thankful for your effort to join this seminar, and we are very excited for your talk. Ola, the floor is yours, and we are expecting your amazing seminar. Thank you very much for sharing your knowledge.
Thank you so much, Zahra. Thank you, everyone. I'm really glad to be here, and I'm really happy to share my expertise with you. As Zahra mentioned, I'm a writing scholar, and this presentation actually comes out from my experience with grant writing. Some of this presentation was also co-authored by my colleagues from CRO, the Corpus and Repository of Writing. We often talk about our grant writing practices. So these contributors are Hadi Banat, Bradley Dilger, Anuj Gupta, Michelle McMullen, and Shelton Beach. And so that part that talks about grant writing practices in CRO was co-authored by us, and I will also talk about some of the European ERC grants. That is that part of presentation that I prepared just for all of you. So as I said, I'm not only a researcher of writing, but I'm also an experienced writing instructor. The field of second language writing and professional writing in the United States is quite well developed. Some of these presentations, some of the knowledge here today is actually coming from the field of applied linguistics. So people who study how, for example, grant proposals are written, what are some components of grant proposals and how they are realized in writing. I also bring experience from industry. I actually worked as a grant writer full-time for the EAC Accelerator program, and the EAC applications are quite similar to the ERC grant in terms of structure. even though the writers have different goals and take their projects different way. I have also worked with CRO, so the Corpus and Repository of Writing. I supported grant writing for big grants that our group won. As Zahra mentioned, I'm also conducting research right now through the National Science Center in Poland, and that is also a grant-funded work, my full-time job. And recently, I have also won with my colleague, Dr. Rodriguez Fuentes, a Duolingo-funded research study. So it brings me a lot of joy to write grant proposals. It's a time where you are allowed to dream big and think about your future, think about your plans, and put that in writing. But actually, on the agenda today, I have two main parts actually of this presentation. So the first part is talking about grant writing as a process that has 7 components. And it's also important to think about grant writing as a project management endeavor. So thinking about your long-term goals as a scholar, and especially if you have a group, thinking about collaboration and planning for grant writing. This is something that maybe is not often as talked about. I think when we think about grant writing, we think about the writing of the proposal process, but I will be talking about the larger context of grant writing in that first part. So I will talk about the 7 elements, and I will talk about the practices of writing collaboratively. What are some key components of writing collaboratively, some practices that I want you to keep in mind as you are working on your proposals. And I also brought today, for the second part, when we are going to focus on proposal itself, I chose a winning proposal from ERC funding scheme, and it's actually from an advanced grant proposal, but it is a social science project that talks about building a database. So I thought that because I'm talking to research librarians, you might appreciate that kind of project more. And I know these are quite similar to each other between the starting grants and the advanced grants in terms of the proposal format. So Zahra right now shared a Google Doc with you. I put some resources there that I will be mentioning, and some elements from the presentation I have been mentioning are going to be in that Google Doc. So you can click on it, you can have it on hand. Later on, we will share the winning proposal. So I just wanted you to keep in mind that there's going to be 2 parts, and we're going to start with the first part right now. But before we jump in, I would like to ask my audience 2 questions actually. So if you could navigate to this address, and I will try to see if I can find the answer to this question. Let's see. So the audience question to my audience is, have you written a grant proposal in the past? So you have 2 choices. I want to know from you about your experience in writing grant proposals. And then the second question is, are you planning to write a proposal soon? So let's see. So we have 5 results. Maybe I'll give you 30 more seconds to try to answer. And we'll see.
We can only see the first question.
Oh, okay. Well, that's fine. Oh, activate. Now you should be able to see the second one. This is my first time using this tool, but it should be good. Oh, now this one isn't active. Okay. This is, I see that there are 5 results, and here we have 2 results. This did not work the way I intended. So
No,
maybe we're good.
Now we see the second question.
Okay. So I don't see the results though. I thought I would see the results right away. So I don't really know why it's not working the way I think it should work. Oh, response history. Okay. So we have, sorry that I'm showing your names. Have you written a grant proposal in the past? We have many people saying yes, some people saying no, one person saying no. So we have experienced the participants here. So, and most of you are planning to write a proposal soon, so that's good. Okay, so without further delay, let me come back to the presentation. So let's talk about the 7 elements of grant writing. When we think about grant writing, it's not only, as I mentioned before, thinking about the proposal itself, you know, opening a Google document or a Word document and writing what you're dreaming about. It's actually thinking about the whole situation of grant writing. And when we think about that, there are a few elements. So first one, we have research. And here it's not the research you do as a researcher, but understanding the grant and its context. I will talk in more depth about this, but thinking about who is the grant funder, who is the institution that wants to give you or give you money, and what are some of the elements you will need for your grant proposal, what are some components that you need for success. So understanding that situation, thinking about who won in the past, how are some of the programs changing, and how your project fits into that is part of research. Another element is networking. So thinking about who, if you need more team members, if it's not just a grant for one person, but for a collaborative project for group, then you have to use your knowledge and use your network to think about who you can engage in that process. You also have to think about evaluation. So evaluating what you already have in terms of your strengths, in terms of your resources, and what you need to improve your chances. Then we have the writing part of the grant writing, so the drafting part, and this can include outlining, drafting, revising, editing the grant. After that, a very important component, and the component that needs time, is reviewing. So getting feedback from maybe people in your network, maybe from the grant funder, maybe from your copy editor to improve that draft. And then for submission and follow-up, these are the favorite phases of grant writing, when you're sending away your project and you can only wait to hear back. So for the submission part, you have to coordinate with your own institution to make sure that you have all the necessary documents. And then for follow-up, you can typically get either feedback on your proposal if it wasn't successful, or you can start working on the project itself. So these 7 elements shouldn't be thought about as a linear progression or chronological progression. You go from research to networking to evaluation, but rather you can think about them in a different manner, moving between them until you reach the submission follow-up stage. And different grants actually will require different time in terms of how much effort you have to spend on particular element. So I have here an example of two types of grants. This is all made up data, but it is here to exemplify the fact that, for example, for internal individual grant, you might spend less time on some elements of networking or evaluation or research because you are already at the institution. So you know these things, but you will spend more time drafting. This is actually drafting, this big part. But for a bigger grant, for if you are, for example, working on a European Union grant, you will spend more time on networking, evaluating, reviewing, drafting, and these other components, because that might be a new situation for you. It might be a new grant. You have to just spend more time learning about it. So once again, as you're working on a grant, or as you're working, for example, with PhD students who will go on and have their own careers later on, you can think about grant writing as a process that is has many elements. And when we work in CRO on grant writing, we move between these different stages, and the different people are assigned different tasks at different point. So we move between evaluation, research, reviewing, drafting. Somebody might be drafting and somebody else might come impact that draft with some knowledge that they have gained over, past day or whatever. So in terms of even writing collaboratively, these elements could be happening at the same time, pushing the grant writing process faster. And when the submission phase happens, so that is the one point where you maybe stop researching and drafting and you move to follow-up. You can learn from, for example, unsuccessful grants. It's rather than just focus on the fact that it was unsuccessful, it's a very good moment to move some of that knowledge from the feedback you get from reviewers to the next drafting and writing process. So if you've learned anything about the weakness of your proposal, you can use that to inform the next time you are working and writing a grant. So just to kind of reiterate, every grant is different, but you will rarely eliminate any of the 7 elements completely. So for internal grants, for grants that you have written many times, these might be very short and they will not require as much effort. But for new grants, for big grants, for collaborative grants where you are involving a lot of people, that will actually be more time consuming. So let's look a little bit more closely at some of the grant writing elements. And we're starting with research. So in this stage, at this element, it is important to think about and look for grants that are a good fit for your work. So how do you learn about new grant opportunities? One way to do that is to ask your colleagues, your mentors or advisors about the grant programs that you're considering. Your network might have the best knowledge in terms of what are some of the successful programs that fund the work that you're doing, because these are the people who usually do similar work. For the long term, you might need to fit your work to grants. That is, you might decide to develop this capacity to take on bigger grants over time. And this can be especially important for scholars whose work is only partially funded in terms of their institutional support, so they might not have a stable position. And as the priorities are changing, even in the academic world, there are certain topics that are of more concern, they're more pressing. You might think about how your work fits into those calls towards those concerns. And you can think about in long term how you can be developing your research agenda to align with these concerns. And it would be good if they do align, right? So that's one thing you can think about. And another important element, you can think about completing pilot projects first. This is very useful for funders to see that you are actually capable of completing a project, and it gives them more confidence that the project you are applying for is going to be successful because you have already done some preliminary work. Another important aspect of research is to learn from materials beyond just the call for grant. So it's different with the European Union grants because, and especially the starting grants, the advanced grants, because they don't have necessarily themes, they just fund excellent research. But for some other grants that come up every so often, you might look at the website of the grant makers and grant funders, see what their mission is, see what their priorities are a given year, see what they have funded in the past to get just a little bit more sense of what they are looking for. And yeah, so the next point here is learn from past winners. And it's not only, sometimes you are able to see the abstracts or maybe even the proposal of the past winner. But if you don't, you can try and contact them and see if they would share their winning proposals with you. Because that is a good way to think about how this particular grant was structured. You might find that the previous winners are not so happy to share their materials, but it might as well be the opposite success. I mean, it could be successful. And last but not least, even if you win some small grants at first, that can also become a further proof for your funders, the future funders, to see that you are able to carry out work successfully, and it can strengthen your future success rate to start even small and have these grants accumulate and sort of a snowball into more success. And as I was talking about that research part, I've mentioned thinking about researching the website of a particular grant funder. And it's important to assess if you are a good fit for particular grant proposal and consider these three elements. So whether your identity as a researcher fits the call for the proposal or aligns with the identity of the organization you're trying to get funding from, and think about how your project fits into that. And I have this little example here. As I was preparing for this presentation, I went on Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, which is, I think, an American foundation that supports research in social sciences and humanities, more so in the humanities. And they, in their mission statement, write that the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation believes that the arts and humanities are where we express our complex humanity, and we believe that everyone deserves the beauty, transcendence, and freedom to be found there. Through our grants, we seek to build just communities, enriched by meaning and empowered by critical thinking, where ideas and imagination can thrive. So as you read this mission statement, and as you think, as you find a particular call for proposals, you can think about these questions. For example, how is my project contributing to building just community? And just community meaning equitable community, a community where fairness is valued. And you can use some of that language again to think, how is it enriching community? How is my project enriching community by meaning and by critical thinking? And these questions can be formed in that particular way using this language from the grant funder to even sort of infuse your proposal with the same language. And you're thinking about how your proposal using this language, but you are also assessing your project in a new light. So you're thinking about what you want to do in these terms that are important for this particular grant funder for this particular institution. So assessing your fit might also just prompt you to think about your work in a new way and make these connections that can help you succeed, but also maybe help you reframe your way of thinking about your project. So thinking about fit is an important element. When we're thinking about your career as a scholar, and also you're thinking about maybe if you're helping someone, right? So as a research librarian, maybe there are some people who come to you for help and for advice on how to approach this topic. I think it's good to think about the timeline and planning writing grants and incorporating grants into your research agenda in this following way. So you can think about long-term planning, monitoring the funding options years in advance, because there are some grant schemes that just open up every year. And you can think about when your CV, when your strengths as a researcher will be optimal for applying for this particular grant. So you can build your CV with the aim of being competitive based on these recurrent calls, especially if you have that time to plan. And maybe that is something you can think about with the ERC grants, for example, the European Union grants, is thinking how you can build your CV so then when they're assessing your proposals and assessing your profile as a researcher, it comes out as being very strong. Some grant funders will require references, and maybe it is a little bit less popular across the ocean from the United States, but in the United States, for sure, it's a culture where everybody gives references to everybody. And that is also maybe the case for some of the grant schemes. So you can also think about your networking and developing relationships so that in the future you can request reference letters from your colleagues, from your network, and that is also crucial for some of the success. And as I mentioned before, for long-term planning, you can contact previous winners and maybe find a way to develop such relationship that you can learn from those people. So that is the long-term planning. And now we're going to move to what I call ad hoc opportunities. So sometimes opportunity comes your way that, it's like 10 days until the deadline and you just saw it and you really need to bring your work together. And in that situation where you only have very little time to put together a proposal, one of the things that you need to essentially keep in mind is to identify elements of the application that require other stakeholders. So that might mean some people that will need to put a signature, some people that will need some extra time to maybe write a letter. So these are the people who you need to contact right away. And this is where keeping your CV updated all the time comes in handy, because you don't want to be putting all those extra lines in the last possible moment. And maybe I'll mention here also, there might be a difference in culture, academic cultures globally, where, for example, in the United States, having a detailed and long CV where you actually put everything you do on your CV is quite important to show all of the work that you've been doing. And I think it might be similar in your context, but if you are applying for those international grants, across different countries, you can think about what exactly is needed on your CV and how you can show your strengths and show your work in there. And another important thing here is to maintain a good archive of different versions of documents. So as you're writing multiple grants, and some of them might not be funded, but because of the nature of that type of writing, this is not published work. It's okay to reuse text between the different grants. So you do not have to start from scratch every time you are writing. And this is particularly important for those ad hoc opportunities where you don't have that extra time to polish your writing. And you can just reuse and recycle some of those materials from previous proposals. And searching for the right opportunity, here maybe I'll mention briefly that internal university grants are a very good way to build your credibility, show your strength for those bigger external grants. So showing that you have successfully completed grants, and there may be smaller internal grants, and you have worked with grant office, or you have worked with the administration at university, can be very helpful for getting those external grants. So the European Union grants, which are, can be bigger. Okay, so let's move on to the next element of grant writing process, which is networking. Networking is quite important because you can build professional network of other academics and collaborators, students who can help you build capacity for grants and do the writing too. And this comes also from our experience in a corpus and repository writing, where you'll see, I'll show you some examples of how collaborative writing can really help build grant proposals faster, and having extra eyes on proposals and in the process can really make the whole process stronger and make it more, I think, just successful in the end. Many grants explicitly will require letters of support, which I mentioned. So it's important to keep in mind who can support your work. You'll also need contacts who can offer frank, constructive feedback for you. So as you are working on your projects and developing your career, or you're advising someone to do that, you can think about developing relationships in other disciplines. So even if you need someone to review your grant proposal and point out those strengths, they can look from a perspective of someone from a different discipline, because oftentimes grant funders will not have exactly the same people on the committee that are assessing your work that know exactly your field exactly the same way you do. These might be people from adjacent disciplines. So having in your network, having people from across different disciplines is quite useful and can provide you with different perspective. Another important element is evaluation. So when you think about you're getting ready, putting your proposal together, you can ask yourself the question, are you ready to do the work necessary to answer the grant program request, and thinking about your capacity for that particular work. Do you have enough time? Do you have enough collaborators or students? And think about how you're going to document the effectiveness of your work. Some of the grants will maybe not explicitly ask you for SMART outcomes, but it is a very good idea to think about the outcomes of your proposal, of your project in specific, measurable, achievable, and realistic and timely manner. So when you're thinking about that project, you can use each of these keywords to inform your proposal writing. How are you measuring? How are you going to measure your success in your project? How do you know it's achievable? How do you know it's realistic? And how can you convey that in your proposal? So you have to think about those SMART outcomes, and think about mechanisms you have for self-evaluation of your work. So thinking about how you can share the results of your work. How do you know that it's going to meet the standards that you're setting out to have? So this is the evaluation part, and it's again a key component of proposal grant writing process. And now we're coming to the drafting and reviewing stage, which is what most people think about when they think about grant writing. It's the key process of putting words on paper. And as a writing researcher and instructor, I'm always passionate about that part. So some of the key things to think about for having good habits for writing a grant proposal is to develop a schedule for drafting. And this comes very useful for the grants. You can plan ahead of time because it's really good for writing to have time to like settle, and you don't look at it for a day and come back to it and see with new eyes some things that you can write better, some things that need to be crossed out, and you have new ideas come in. So if you give time to writing, it can become stronger. Another important element is to build a checklist with a timeline for each of the elements, including communication logistics. So this is also very important, for your own project management, if you are the only person writing your draft. But if you are working with a group of people, that becomes very important and very essential. And another key element here is to think about your grant office, or if you're just in an institution, some project support office, deans, assistant deans, or anyone in the administration, and thinking about how much time they will need once you do have your project ready to move it forward. But also you can talk to them before you start writing to learn about some of the constraints maybe that you'll have in your project. And you can think about how that will impact your project itself. So these could be budget constraints, these could be some infrastructure constraints. So communicating with the institution that hosting you will be a very good idea. Another crucial idea is researching audience. And here by audience, I mean the people who are going to read your proposal and who are going to assess it. I know in the ERC grants, the panels consist of people who might have different disciplinary allegiance. They might be in general social scientists or people in the humanities, but you will not know exactly if it's going to be a historian, a philosopher, or a sociologist reading your work, but you're submitting to a particular panel. So you can think about what are some of the needs of that particular audience, how they are reading your proposal and what they might value. And that is a very, very crucial step. And it's good to know who is actually reading those proposals. As I mentioned before, another key element is to think to repurpose your text from previous proposals and work, especially if you have any parts that are well written and you're proud of. And these might be like a method section. And any time you are bringing that text into a new draft, you can think about how it's going to change in this new iteration, thinking about the mission, for example, of the grant funder, thinking about the audience, how is this continuation of your research project, how is it changing when you're writing it for a new audience, and why should they care, this particular group, why should they care about this project? So while maybe some of the elements like methods will stay the same, because it's a new audience, the way you talk about your project and why it's important might change between different grant proposals. And as I said before, looking at, for example, a mission statement can give you a new idea, new way to talk about your project without even changing essentially what you're doing, but the new way of thinking about how you're talking about it can prove essential. Draft a budget and solicit key information from stakeholders is another element that's important in drafting. And it's good to have your budget checked by another person. It's important to not make any mistakes in the budget. So this can be a time-consuming work on a very small particular piece of the proposal. And keep in mind, it doesn't have to be a sprint, especially if you do give yourself enough time to write it. If you are a person that is not obsessed with organizing, we're all different people. We have our strengths and weaknesses. And I know for people who are not are not huge fans of organization on a daily basis, all of these elements of drafting, especially building a checklist and thinking about communication, is going to ensure a really good quality proposal. So another thing to think about is when you are drafting, especially larger projects, writing a one-page description of your project can be an important first step. So why write a one-page description of your project that maybe is not going to even go into the writing proposal? The proposal itself, it's not required by the grant scheme, but you can identify the most important parts of your project. So maybe articulate the aim of the project, think about what kind of key concepts, what kind of language you're going to use to talk about your project. You can consider a problem solution organizational scheme. So stating clearly what is the problem you're trying to solve, and frame it in a way that is understandable for your particular audience, that is sort of clear to understand for maybe more general audience, for somebody who's not in your discipline every day thinking about these problems. And so after stating that problem clearly, stating in that one pager, how is your project solving that problem? So having this clear statement, what is the problem? What is my project offering as a solution? Why is it important? And then you explain your methods and relevant literature, but quite succinctly because it is one pager. And then you sketch out implication and possibilities. So this one page draft can really contain the key elements of the proposal itself, because it does have the statement of the problems, the solution. And this document, you can share it with your network, especially with those who have experience writing grants, have experience maybe getting the grant looking for or looking at, and get feedback on the language you're using, the way you're presenting your problem, before you even did the work of writing out the whole 5 pages or the whole 15 pages of the proposal. Before you put all that work, then you would have to rework if you get that feedback. So, and this is also a document that you can expand, right? So once you are settled on this particular way of talking about the problem, then you can expand it and draft it into 5 pages, draft it into 15 pages. But checking the structure of the way you're presenting the problem at this point, it can be very useful and save time for everyone. And reviewing. Reviewing is an important part of the drafting process. It can be very emotional part of the grant proposal writing process for some people. And when you get feedback, and ask for feedback early and often. So maybe try not to ask for feedback the day before the deadline, because for someone who wants to really help you, and they see how much work there needs to be done to get to that point, there might just not be enough time to implement that feedback into your proposal, right? So if you ask a week before, 2 weeks before your own internal deadline for submitting the grant to the institution, there is time to rework and incorporate that feedback from others into your proposals. And don't hide from the reviews. I also always tend to think about feedback as this way to shape up and really kind of chisel is the word. I always think about it in this craft way, but the more people see your proposal, and especially the people who are selected by you because they have more experience or have just a different way of thinking about writing, if you select a few people who can give you feedback, they can bring those different perspectives and really strengthen your proposal, even though it feels like maybe somebody's going to be judging you, but really it's not judgment, it's just feedback. And getting feedback can be anxiogenic, so creating this anxiety, but constructive criticism will be what makes your work stronger. Your advisors, for students, your advisors can be their resource, but if you have good relationship with your advisor from the past, or you have worked cross-institutionally, cross-culturally, you can ask these collaborators for that feedback. You can also research the review process and use that information in shaping your work. And I will show you exactly today how that was used in that ERC grant proposal. And there are some grant schemes, some grant makers will actually review your draft before the deadline. So some programs, not all, not many, but some will actually allow you to submit your proposal before the deadline and talk to them and negotiate with them and use their feedback to strengthen your chances. So that's the reviewing part. My advice to you is just do not be afraid to show your writing to other people, and don't wait for the last moment to do so. And last but not least is the submission and follow-up. So here, when you're thinking about submission, you really have to plan ahead with advisors, with departments and others to really coordinate that submission phase, because it oftentimes can take a few weeks rather than a few days. Budget time to get signatures from required authorities, including time for them to read your draft proposal. So some people might need to read it carefully before they sign it. Of course, maybe there's a legal department that needs to do that. And most submission processes are online and begin early to ensure last-minute glitches won't derail your work. And that is something I know from experience. I think the I don't know if the European Union has improved their submission portal, but when I worked in the grant writing for industry and the EIC accelerator, we really were really kind of aware of all the glitches and problems with the portal, and really took half of a day to submit the proposal there. So keep that in mind. Also, proofread the entire proposal if you can. You can hire people to do that too. Review the timeline and budget, and send your final draft to your institutional grant office for final review. Again, give other people enough time to review it. Try to submit your proposal to the funder 2 days prior to the deadline. This is a great advice. And I have certainly not been the person who did it in the last moment, not at all. I love giving advice, and I also know that there is a reality to it. But sometimes, you know, you sometimes do it on the last possible day, but the more time you give yourself, the better. And in the follow-up phase, you can plan ahead if grant makers expect interim or final reports, and mention some publication. So these are all important elements to file the reports, to mention them in publications, because that will allow you to ask for funding again when the time comes from the same place. And if you win a grant, you have that funding, but you can think in the long term. It just puts you back in the cycle of evaluation, networking, thinking about the next steps, and communicate with grant makers if changes to your project are needed. So reasonable requests are often granted. Think about how, for example, the COVID pandemic has impacted projects all around the world, and there was a lot of communication that was needed. Okay, so this was more of a theoretical part, and this kind of project management part, which I really appreciate as someone who just started thinking about grant funding at the end of my grad school experience after I got a PhD. So if you have people who come to you for advice, keep all of these elements in mind, and think about grant writing process as this very big process that has many different elements, and good writing processes or grant writing processes really take into consideration all of these elements. So now I will move on to this kind of short part where I'll show you how this group that I work with, how we build our infrastructure or build our project management skills to ensure success in our grant writing process and ensure that everybody gets good experience. So one of the key elements, and I shared that in the handout, is really when you find a grant call, when you find a grant scheme that you want to apply for, and this maybe again is not an ERC scheme, it's always the same this every year, but as you read the request for proposal, you have to be actively looking and annotating. So you can copy and paste the call into a Google Doc, and whether you're working on your own or working with other people, you can be actively looking for these key elements as funder priorities. What are their priorities? What is the mission? Deadlines. So when are things due? And then starting from that, you can build a calendar, right? So you're reading through the proposal, but also you're building your project management to think about, okay, so there are certain deadlines, and I will put it in the calendar, and you also add to that the buffer, right? Exactly like how much time you will need for each step. If there are some letters of recommendation required, when is the deadline for that? How early in the process you will have to, like, how much time will you give to the people who will need to write letters of support to you? Put that in the calendar for that project. Put it on the to-do list, right? So on the right, we have a to-do list. And so further on, as you're reading, you think about what are the components you might create the particular documents, even if they are empty, just with the heading, so you don't forget all the components that are needed. Then think about the resources you will need, the criteria for assessment of the proposal, how many people you will need for the particular project, check cross-references, list the uncertainties. So maybe you're reading something, and I have that as a case even right now, is like, what are some of the uncertainties in terms of what you can put in the budget and what cannot be funded. So list that so you can ask all of your questions at once for the grant funders. Think about your team strengths, and especially for those who you're going to invite to the team, and team weaknesses, maybe who you need to invite more. And as you're like looking through that grant proposal, you build that documentation. So as I mentioned, calendars, to-do list, lists of further reading, evaluation instruments, questions for your team, and questions for the program officer. So these are important elements. So how we do that, we use Basecamp, and you can see that we build a to-do list and assign it collaboratively. So we have a number of people working on particular project. This is actually for a conference presentation, but the same thing happens with a grant proposal. We also, when we build a current calendar, it doesn't even have to be in a calendar, right? So as we are writing a list of, here is actually proposal components, we have a list of items in a Google Doc, the status of it, and who and by what time they will confirm or get that particular element. And this comes from the more organized part of our group, the people who have everything well organized and love planning. So that is definitely a strength in our group. Another element is meetings and keeping track of what you're discussing as you're working on the grant collaboratively. So we have, you can track all the decision making, especially for big grants, big proposals. When you are working remotely with people, it's very important to have everything written down as you're going through the meetings. So when you think about infrastructure for working with teams on grant, there's two ways to think about infrastructure. So there's methods and best practices for collaborating, coordinating work. So how will you share information, ask for feedback? What roles will you assign? How do you ensure that everyone is being heard and getting to contribute substantially to grant writing? And you can also coordinate your individual work, organize folders, and identify those who want to give you feedback, create timelines and checklists, and find an accountability buddy. So as you write collaboratively with other people, make sure that you assign sections to members of the team and draft. So there is no document that is lying without having anyone work on them, without having anyone who has responsibility for it. Assign others to read and comment on sections. So make sure that you're using all your strengths of your team to create those documents. You can revise in suggestion mode, respond in comments, assign someone to read and accept changes and to close comments, assign someone to line edit in suggestions mode, pay attention to inconsistencies in voice and word choice. So if you're writing with other people, different people have different styles, and it's important to have one person making sure that it all sounds as though one voice wrote it, not necessarily one person, but it has the same voice and style. And assign someone to proofread, resolve the line edits, and double check the formatting and correct any errors. So these elements are quite important. And you can also outsource those, as I know that some multilingual scholars can often do that and have that funded to make sure that you catch the errors that can impact intelligibility. So here we have just a little example of our collaborative writing session. But Crow is a team that is very proud of its practices. And we can share any good practices with you if you have any questions. And now I'll move on to that more practical part of our presentation today, my presentation today. And I wanted to just look at the grant proposal itself and to look at that one particular grant proposal from an ERC Advanced Grant. But before we do that, I will just introduce you briefly to this idea of genre and genre writing, genre pedagogy. So this is the word genre here. And what is genre? How can it help us in writing grants? How can it help us in writing proposals? So traditionally, the word genre was conceptualized as a text type. And here I have a couple of different examples of different genres in writing. So we have a wedding invitation, right? So a wedding invitation can be its own genre. It's a type of document, right? So usually it will have the names of the couple, when they are getting married, where they are getting married, information that you're invited, which is quite different from a children's book that I have here. That again is just a piece of writing, but because it has a different audience and different purpose, right? So it's not to inform or to invite, but it's to entertain children. It will have more, many pages, colorful pages with, with characters, and it will have short, simple sentences, and it will be telling a story, right? So we have this other document that has a different genre, children's book versus invitation, and maybe most familiar to audience in this meeting is a research article that looks nothing like an invitation. It looks nothing like a children's book. It is a very text heavy, right? So it's a genre of research article that we were going to talk about in 2 weeks, but it has a certain structure. It has typically a title, names of the authors, abstract, and then starts with an introduction. So in the past, we thought about genre as a text type, but as in applied linguistics and rhetoric and composition, this idea of genre developed to think about how what we write is really a response to a recurring social situation. So because we have weddings and we need people to come, we found this document of wedding invitation that serves this purpose of recurring social situational invitation. And because it recurs, it is repeated so many times, it became just a very stable, kind of form. And it might have different colors, it might have different images on it, but these crucial information of who and when is getting married is repeated. The same thing with children's book, because it needs to entertain and stimulate children and teach them something, but the language cannot be complicated. This recurring social situation of like entertaining, telling stories to children, the children books developed, and they sort of look similar to each other. If you even looked at children's books across different languages, you would recognize a children's book from just a regular book. And the same thing happens with grant writing. It's a recurring social situation. It's a recurring situation where you're asking someone, you and your group, you're asking someone to fund your project. And you ask it in an academic setting. So it's a recurring situation, and you're asking for funding. And because of that, the proposal will typically have similar elements, right? What you want to do, how you want to do it, why is it important? But what differs between a research paper and even, wedding invitation children's book and a grant proposal is that a proposal is occluded genre. So I have this here, it's a term that John Swayes came up with this, and you probably know this, it's really hard to get access to many different proposals written by people because they are submitted between the researcher and the agency, and they typically are not listed, they are not published, they are occluded, meaning not visible, they are difficult to access. And the way we typically learn how to write is, one, because we write ourselves, but two, because we read this particular genre again and again in different iterations in different formats. And so I think grant writing is particularly challenging because we do not have access to enough proposals. If you wanted to read, many different proposals, especially for that one particular grant, it's very hard to get your hands on that particular proposal. So I solved this problem in the handout. You'll see there's like a list of contents, the content list at the beginning of my handout. And I have the link to, I think, 2 or 3 sources for grant proposals where you can click. There's O grants, there is our Rio journal. It's a very strange journal, but you can go into these databases and read funded and unfunded proposals. And in that way, you can improve just your understanding of the genre by reading it. And I want to analyze with you one particular grant proposal in a moment. But what is also important for grant writing, and it's different from research article writing or any other type of writing, is that the purposes of grant writing are different than purposes of, for example, writing a research article. And these are very useful to keep in mind always when you're writing. And when you're reading someone else's grant proposal, and when you are thinking about the language of the grant proposal, is that first of all, they need to be promissory. So you are promising results arising from the proposed research project. And here I have a statement from the grant proposal we're going to look in a moment that says this proposal intends to change the way we think about macroeconomic outcomes. So we're thinking about this promissory purpose for the whole proposal and the whole project, but you can also think where am I showing that I am promising results, right? So, and that could be in many different places in the proposal. It needs to be also promotional. So you need to think about your work as really good, amazing, promote yourself as a scholar, promote your project as something that is outstanding, that is crucial and essential, and it's the best, right? It's better than other ways to solve the problem or look at the problem. So do not hesitate to be promotional. Take out that business side of you and apply it to this project and think about how you are promoting it. It needs to be problem-oriented. So it needs to be clear what problem you're trying to solve with your project. And I have an example from this proposal we're going to look at in a moment. It says, it will allow us for the first time to have a view of, at the European level, of the role of THC in the rise of the West. So this writer is saying what problem this is going to solve, because this is the first time that something is happening, and it will allow us to have a view. So this is kind of what is this? So how is it solving? And you'll see that the writer is also kind of showing the problems in the proposal itself, and then persuasive. So think about your language, how you are using your language to persuade the audience. So here I have a sample. It's rigorously grounded in evidence. And why did I choose this particular sentence or this phrase say it's persuasive, because when you're thinking about the audience, and this one particular for ERC, these are other scholars. And how do you convince other scholars that what you're doing is good? What kind of language are you using? You're, using the language of science. So here we have rigorously grounded in evidence. So it's grounded, there's evidence, and it's rigorous. It's what scientists like. So you adapt your persuasion to the audience you're talking to, and think about what is valued by that audience in terms of what is convincing about how do you say that your project is good to this particular audience that is going to assess your work. So the 4 purposes, the 4 P's as I call them, are super, super important. And now we're going to look at particularly at the structure of a proposal. So, whenever you start to write, and we're using the ERC, so you're writing the synopsis or you're writing an abstract, similarly to a research article, it will have a particular structure. It will have a structure in terms of the content. What do you need to show? So one way to look at this is to think about, when you think about the genre in proposal writing, or any type of genre, usually we recognize we have this template in our head. It's like, what comes first? What comes second when I'm writing? Why is this going to be first? Why is it going to be second? And in applied linguistics and writing studies, we think about moves and steps in writing. So, and I'll show you a simple example in a moment, then we're going to move on to a more complex example. But the move is, in genre analysis, a discoursal or rhetorical unit that performs the coherent communicative function. So in a moment, you'll see what that means, but it's like, I need this part of the text to have this, to have this function of communicating a particular thing. And the step is like how you break that apart. So if you want to maybe introduce a topic, introducing a topic is the move. How do you do that? Maybe first step would be introducing a particular term, then introducing the key literature on it, and then summarizing that information would be 3 steps. So anytime we're thinking about writing, we think about which part has a bigger communicative function and what are some smaller parts that can help that communicative function happen. And and a simple example here is when you're writing an email in response to a job ad, and you'll find on the internet many people are asking, like, how do I write that? But we know how you write that, especially if you're like you've lived on this planet for a little bit longer, you applied for jobs, is anytime you write an email, you have greeting, right? And that's like a move. Then like while you're writing, that's another move. So I'm writing in response to the opening, blah, blah, blah. So we have this template in our head when we write an email like that, because we have been in this recurrent situation and we have written this before. Maybe we have received that email before, and we have that pattern. So the more we find ourselves in a particular situation, the more aware we are of like what pattern in the writing we need. And similarly, we're going to talk about this in 2 weeks, but maybe you're very familiar with research article introduction, right? So when we think about writing a research article introduction, we start with generalization about on topics. So we are saying, well, cats are very important in nature. They are the best cats, like the best creatures in the world. And then we move on to the niche. So, but not much is known about what cats do at night, right? So we like introduce a topic and we say what the problem is. So that's very typical for article introductions. So I have actually, for this presentation today, I've looked at some research on what are some of the typical moves in grant proposals in abstracts and synopses. And so I'm going to tell you about this particular, about this organization. And then we're going to look at how a writer is using that in his grant proposal. So first element is establishing territory, similarly maybe to a research article where we describe existing knowledge upon which the proposal is based. this move can take two forms. So either you're describing a real world problem. So there is a disease, there's a natural disaster, or maybe like in our proposal that we're looking at, it's going to be, there needs to be a database, but it doesn't exist. So there's a real world problem. Or you're reporting current scientific knowledge. So maybe genetic markers, tectonic models, or, you know, what we know about cats. And so you're starting a proposal with describing this knowledge and what is known, what is the problem, or what is the current state of knowledge on a particular topic. And then we move on to what is not known, right? So we are moving to the so-called niche. So it indicates some limitations described above. So this can either be formulated as a real world problem that needs solving, so a gap in the present scientific knowledge, or a potential for further research in promising direction. So in our proposal, we're going to look in a moment, there is a gap because there is research on a certain topic, there is knowledge on a certain topic, but the methodology used is not well developed, and this is a limitation to this problem. And then we have the goal. So in the goal phase, so after you say what the limitation is, you say what is the single main purpose of your proposed research. So the overall goal is the central move of the grant proposal, and provides the title of the proposal. And similarly, you know, in the paper we might do the same thing, is like, what is the goal of the paper? But here you're, so what is the goal of this project? How are you gonna address this niche? How are going to address this problem? And then you move on to means. So write what are some specific sub-goals and how you describe the research methods and materials, and predict specific results or achievements that contribute to fulfilling the overall goal described above. So, so you describe the research methods, you describe the materials, how you're going to accomplish it. And then the benefits. So outline the expected benefits of the project, usually formulated as an upshot of the overall goal. This move on shows a dual structure with the benefits to scientific understanding, followed by benefits to the real world applications. And here I would also move you back to thinking about, again, maybe a mission statement, right? So if you are applying for a particular grant and this foundation has a mission statement and there is a goal for this particular call, you can use that language, come back to it, and frame the benefits of your project in terms of what they are looking for. So we have these moves of territory, niche, goal, means, and benefits. And I wanted us to look at ERC Advanced Grant. That was a funded grant written by David Delacroix from University Catholic de Louvain. And here I wrote a project, did elite human capital trigger the rise of the West? Insights from a new database of scholars from European universities and academies. And let me just kind of find my copy of it. Okay, so I think you'll be able to see this. So we have these 4 categories: move, territory, niche, goal, means, and benefits. And Zahra, maybe you can put it in the chat. Yeah, so Zahra put in the chat, and we, you know, if you need access to it, you can message Zahra. I don't know, we have the same thing on YouTube, but this is the B1 section. This is the short 5-page section that the writer wrote. This is the first one that they assess in both your starting grant and in your advanced grant if you're doing that. So let's look at this. How does this structure of, so I'm gonna just like quickly move this: territory, niche, goal, means, and benefits. How did this writer use it in their extended synopsis? So the text begins with the territory. Research question: was upper tail human capital critical to triggering the rise of the West? So we have this research question, and then we begin with the territory. So describing existing knowledge upon which the proposal is based. The rise of the West described the unleashing of economic and social transformation, which had never been experienced before by any society since the Neolithic Revolution. What happened around 1800 was deeply rooted in history. Many authors have searched for the profound causes of the rise of the West. And we have a bunch of APA citations in text citations. So you can see that existing knowledge kind of being put in really kind of in a string citation. And for most of them, self-reinforcement dynamic of technological institutional progress played a key role, period. The outstanding debate concerns the key forces that made these virtuous circles possible. So we have this territory. We have just one paragraph introducing the topic, and then we move on to the niche. So to the degree to which the long march of history is driven by vital few such as emperors, religious leaders, and great investors is disputed. And you can see this language here, disputed. We see this limitation, uncertainty, disagreement. It is particularly controversial. So again, coming back to this language of the limitation of the problem. So there's controversy as far as the contribution to technological progress is concerned. And then the writer moves on to a couple of questions. So introducing even more uncertainty, where individuals such as Newton, Galileo, Kepler, and Vesalius really needed for the Industrial Revolution to take place. Is it true that Moker writes, in the market economy, it is of the few who drag along the many? Is it true? And then we have another question. So we have these questions, which are further kind of showing unknown elements, uncertainty. So showing that niche, the limitation. And then the goal comes in. So in yellow, we have the goal. The aim of this project is to analyze quantitatively whether elite knowledge and upper tail human capital were critical to triggering the rise of the West. So it follows exactly really what we have here, right? It's territory, it's niche, it's goal. And what is happening here, because this is a 5-page draft, it comes back to the territory. Because this green part, it's the review of literature, and it's kind of showing three, so you can read it later, but it's showing 3 ways of thinking about 3 competing views. The current literature, which is mostly based on qualitative approaches, can be grouped into 3 competing views, and then we have the description of these 3 competitive views. So it's showing more territory, but it's also kind of complicating it a little bit, showing in some ways more uncertainty because they're competing views again. Again, which one is the right one, right? Like the scientist in us might ask. So it's doing the territory move by showing the literature, showing the 3 competing views, but it's also showing the niche because there are 3 and they're competing and they have been done qualitatively. So this writer moves again to the niche and territory, I would say, by starting by saying there are currently no global quantitative analysis of the historical effects of the UTHS. So you can say that this person saying in the previous paragraph, all this research has been qualitative, and starting this new paragraph with the topic sentence, there are no global quantitative analysis. So he is also pointing out the niche in methodology. So we had the niche in terms of literature. We had the problem in terms of literature. There's uncertainty in literature. And maybe this uncertainty is coming from the methodology, because the methodology was different and it was qualitative. Maybe the quantitative methodology will provide some response. And in blue, so as I had in our blue mark means the way. So after, kind of going to the niche and territory, after the goal, the writer goes into the means. So how are they going to solve the problem? How they are going to address the niche by to take this debate to a new level, I proposed in the first step to build a database of a large sample of university professors and members of scientific academies. So they kind of, this person goes into detail about the particular ways to do that, and you can kind of read that, it's very interesting. But last but not least, in that 5-page summary, in the conclusion is where the benefits come. So remember how we had the benefits, outlines the expected benefits of the project. So in the conclusion, constituting the proposed database and developing research relies on its step, blah, blah. Okay, so for research and growth and development, this proposal intends to change the way we think about macroeconomic outcomes by unraveling the rich interactions between behavior and scholars, etc. So, and there might be more benefits inside of the proposal as you read it, but you can see that this kind of very simple structure, it has really, it's guiding the writing, and it's similar to a research proposal in some ways, but because this is a project that has aims and goals and will have consequences, it needs that means and benefits in it. So another, I know we're kind of probably short on time, starting to get short on time, but there's 2 more tips I wanted to share with you. As one of them is starting from the end. So when you are looking to write a grant proposal, it's very important to you. And for example, in the ERC, the peer review, the rubrics for how your work is going to be assessed is published. So you can look at the questions that the people who are assessing your work, what kind of questions they are using. And I have them here. So first part is groundbreaking nature, ambition, and feasibility. Groundbreaking nature and potential impact of research project. And there are questions that the reviewers need to answer when they're assessing your proposal. To what extent does the proposed research address important challenges? To what extent are the objectives ambitious and beyond the state of the art? Novel concepts, approaches, and developments. So you read this rubric and you can see, for example, in this writer, what kind of language did he use to show that this is an important challenge. So we kind of see this grand language of unleashing deeply rooted, outstanding debate. And especially outstanding debate, like it's ongoing. This is disputed, this is controversial. So we can see the importance of this problem. And you can think about other places where this person is doing that. To what extent are the objectives ambitious and beyond the state of the art? So there's no global quantitative analysis of this. So clearly it goes beyond the state of the art, beyond the current state, beyond what is happening right now, what is in the literature. And you can think about how in this rubric that is looking for ambition beyond the state of the art, how is that reflected in the language? So here it's like clearly saying there's no global solution to this problem. I am going to be the one sort of who is going to solve this. And when this reviewer is looking at this rubric and they're looking at the language you use, because they read that 5 pages, make it easier for them to answer these questions by using that kind of language. And last but not least, I actually have a little demo I wanted to do with Collocate. So because I know some of you are second language writers, and you want to use that kind of language to use kind of collocations, use language to make your proposal stronger, and sometimes maybe you are missing certain adjectives or adverbs. So in that document I prepared for you, I listed this tool called Collocate. It's developed by applied linguists in the UK. And I have the sentence here. It's like, let's say you're writing a project about libraries, and here you put your maybe a fragment or paragraph, and it will analyze it. So let's say you want why is this? This should be insert format table, suggest collocation. Okay, so we click here, suggest collocation, and it will highlight the words you can add collocations to. So maybe you want to make it more descriptive. You want to make it more maybe ambitious, or talking about beyond state of the art, showing that is how important it is. So our project will respond effectively, right? So let's say you want to add that collocation. You can choose the best sort of, this is based on also academic writing, I think, or based on a corpus. So the kind of show more, let's say, show more ambition or more importance. Let's see, we have an urgent need. So our project will respond effectively to the need of libraries, right? So that this need is very important, right? So we have to put pressing need. It's just not a need, it's a pressing need. So it's very, very difficult. And to solve this problem, serious problem, right? So we have a serious problem. How else we can say fundamental problem, right? So let's say so you want to make your make your writing a little bit more ambitious. You can or ambitious, I mean more particular. You want to add some of that urgency, some of that importance to your writing. You can use this tool to help you work through your proposal, but you have to be careful with it. But I think it's a very useful tool. So, so that's also shared on the Google Hangout. So that was actually my last slide for today, and my last grant tip. And I wanted to thank everyone for being here, and I welcome any questions you might have. And I hope this was useful to you, and it will make your proposal successful.
Thank you so much, Ola. We are fascinated by your presentation, and we will use it for many purposes in the future, I think. We still have 13 participants on YouTube. If they have questions, they can ask via YouTube chat. Greta, do you have any questions?
I had questions before your presentation, but this was really a very well organized presentation. So you answered all my questions during your presentation. So now I have no question. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wondering about your opinions about the grant lotteries, because most of it is not about writing research grants, but most of the people in the academia are discussing about changing the system as like grant lotteries. The funding agencies organize lotteries for grants and distribute the grants considering the results of these lotteries. What do you think about this kind of distribution of research grants?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting idea, especially for those grant schemes that have thousands of people applying. And I think that like in the European Union, it's really unclear, despite the fact that, for example, I was showing you the rubric, it's really unclear of like what quality the assessment process is, because there sometimes it seems that there is a lot of uncertainty in terms of like how well the assessment works and why certain people are winning or not others. And then there's the bias in terms of gender and maybe topics, right? So I think for those very competitive grant schemes, I think it's a good idea. And after, maybe there could be like some kind of quality check, of course, right? First stage quality check, and maybe it's a university check, but after that, I think for those schemes where there's a certain threshold that you need, I think it's a very good idea for a lottery to happen, honestly. But for certain smaller ones, like, and that could be like $100,000 or $200,000. There's certain grants that, should go maybe to certain communities and certain projects that are targeting a particular problem and are different from some of those, like the ERC, where like everybody just does what they think is important, and there's, and that's kind of unclear. So I think for certain grants that have certain particular goals, maybe helping some communities, solving some particular problem, I think there could be a traditional assessment model. And then for those excellence grants, I think lottery after some threshold, I think is a good idea. But I know you're more of an expert in the assessment, research funding, stuff like that.
Thank you very much. I think we don't have more questions. Thank you for joining us today. We will have one more seminar with you 2 weeks later on scientific writing, scientific article writing. And see you in the next seminar of ours. It will be at 25th of November. Yeah, 25th November.
Thank you so much for inviting me and having me here.
Thank you so much. See you again.
See ya.
Bye-bye.